Hello, and welcome to the May edition of Sepsis Chatter. My name is Susan Von Bossi, and I am a quality consultant for Registry Partners Incorporated. This presentation will focus on the data elements initial lactate collection and results, and repeat lactate collection. The information provided in this presentation is based on the CMS Specifications Manual for National Hospital Inpatient Quality Measures, discharges January 1st through June 30th, 2022. At the completion of this presentation, the attendee will be able to state the importance of lactate collection in the septic patient, abstract the correct initial lactate collection date and time, abstract the correct initial lactate result, recognize when an elevated lactate result should be excluded, determine when and if a repeat lactate collection is required, and finally, abstract the correct repeat lactate collection date and time. Let's take a minute and talk about why lactate collection is important for the assessment and management of the septic patient. According to the Sepsis Alliance, mortality rates increase approximately 8% for each hour that severe sepsis or septic shock goes undiagnosed and untreated. Trending lactate levels in the septic patient has been found to be a useful measurement of tissue perfusion, disease progression, and the direction and effectiveness of treatment. An example would be an initial lactate of 4.0 or greater. This would trigger the need for fluid resuscitation. By monitoring lactate levels, severe sepsis and progression to septic shock are more likely to be identified and treated as soon as possible, hopefully increasing the likelihood of survival. Let's review the initial lactate collection data element. The CMS definition: documentation of collection of an initial lactate level within the specified time frame. The specified time frame is defined as 6 hours prior to through 3 hours following the onset of severe sepsis. The data element question: was an initial lactate drawn within the specified time frame? The allowable values are yes, an initial lactate level was drawn within the specified time frame, or no, an initial lactate level was not drawn within the specified time frame or unable to be determined. Determining the correct lactate collection time when collections are documented prior to or at the time of severe sepsis onset. If there is one documented collection time within the time period 6 hours prior to through the onset of severe sepsis, abstract that one collection time. Priority source is lab documentation. However, there is additional guidance in determining the initial lactate collection date and time when multiple lactate collections are documented 6 hours prior to through the onset of severe sepsis. The guidance states to use the highest lactate level drawn from the onset of severe sepsis time to 6 hours before that onset time. In this example, you will see that onset of severe sepsis was at 12 o'clock. Lactate collections were as follows. 9 o'clock had a result of 2.0. 10 o'clock had a result of 3.4. In this scenario, we would abstract the initial lactate collection at 10 o'clock with the result of 3.4. This is the highest value prior to the onset of severe sepsis. Because the time period for the initial lactate collection is 6 hours prior to through 3 hours following the onset of severe sepsis, it is possible that the initial lactate level was collected following the onset time. If multiple lactates were collected, again, abstract the collection time with the highest result. In this scenario, The onset of severe sepsis was 12 o'clock. The lactate collections were as follows. At 12:05, there was a collection with a result of 2.0. At 12:30, the result was 3.4. At 1300, the result was 4.2. In the previous scenario, we had determined that the onset of severe sepsis was at 12 o'clock. The lactate collections are as follows. At 12:05, the result was 2.0. At 12:30, the result was 3.4. And at 1300, the result was 4.2. Keep in mind that there were no lactate collections prior to onset. So what would we abstract as the initial lactate collection? Abstract the initial lactate collection at 1300 with a result of 4.2. This is the highest value within 3 hours following the onset of severe sepsis, and there were no collections documented prior to onset. It is possible that the initial lactate collection is also at the same time as the onset of severe sepsis. The example is as follows. At 12 o'clock, the MD documented severe sepsis as a diagnosis in the H&P. The lactate collections were as follows. At 8 o'clock, there was a result of 1.8. At 10:30, the result was 2.2, and the 12 o'clock lactate collection, the result was 3.2. In this scenario, the initial lactate collection time would be the 12 o'clock time because this is the highest value documented from the onset of severe sepsis time through 6 hours prior to the onset time. Now let's review the next data element, initial lactate result. The CMS definition is documentation of the initial lactate level result. The data element question, what was the initial lactate level result? The allowable values are 1. The initial lactate level was less than or equal to 2, or there is no result in the chart, or unable to determine the result. Value 2, the initial lactate level was greater than 2 and less than 4. And value 3, the initial lactate level was 4 or greater. The initial lactate result. If there is documentation that an initial lactate was collected, but there's no documentation of a result, select value 1. Remember that part of the value 1 answer is the following. It's the initial lactate level was less than or equal to 2, or there is no result in the chart, or unable to determine the result. For documentation of point-of-care testing, that is also recorded in the lab results, use the earliest time documented for the same result. In order to exclude the elevated lactate result as organ dysfunction, we would treat the elevated lactate result the same way as any abnormal SIRS indicator or documentation of organ dysfunction by using the following criteria. Exclude any elevated lactate results that are documented as normal for that patient, due to a chronic condition, due to a medication, documented as in error or questionable. For these scenarios, you would select value 1. If there is conflicting documentation regarding an infectious versus non-infectious source of an elevated lactate, use the abnormal value. In the following example, the provider documented lactic acidosis, lactate result 6.0. Could be due to metformin use versus acutely infected cellulitis. We'll hold metformin and order serial repeat collections. In this scenario, the documentation indicates lactic acidosis could be due to a medication or infectious source? We would answer number 3, lactate greater to or equal to 4.0. Now that we have discussed how to abstract the initial lactate collection and how to answer the initial lactate result question, let's review the requirements for repeat lactate level collection. The CMS definition: documentation of the collection of a repeat lactate. Data collection question: was a repeat lactate level drawn within the specified time window? For an initial lactate result greater than 2.0, a repeat lactate level is required to be collected. The specified time frame begins with the initial lactate level collection time and ends 6 hours after the severe sepsis presentation time. Abstract the earliest time that a repeat lactate level was collected or an attempt was made to collect. Let's look at this example. The provider documented the onset of severe sepsis at 9 o'clock. The initial lactate was collected at 8:50 and the result was 2.2 at 9 o'clock. Subsequent lactate collections were as follows. At 9:10, the result was 2.25. At 9:30, the result was 3.0. Keep in mind that we are looking for the repeat lactate collection and not the highest value. Select the collection time at 9:10, since this is the earliest time following the initial lactate collection and the onset of severe sepsis. Determining the correct initial lactate collection time is key to when and if a repeat lactate has been collected within the acceptable time frame. We've already determined that the lactate collection with the highest result is considered the initial lactate collection, and we would abstract this date and time. Because we're abstracting the collection time with the highest result, we also know that the lactate collection is not necessarily the first collection documented. As you will see in the next example, this can and will affect the repeat collection time. To determine the repeat lactate collection time, we first need to determine the initial lactate collection time. In this scenario, onset of severe sepsis was at 1300. The lactate collections and results are as follows. At 10:50, a lactate was collected with a result of 4.2 at 11 o'clock. At 11:30, another lactate was collected with a result of 4.8 at 11:45. Lastly, at 12:20, a lactate was collected with a result of 6.0 at 12:45. Beyond that, no further lactate collections were noted on this date. Because the lactate collected at 12:20 has the highest result value, this would be considered the initial lactate collection. Unfortunately, there were no further lactate collections following this, so this case would fail the measure because no repeat lactate levels were collected within the acceptable time frame. Before I end this presentation, I just wanted to go over a few takeaways from today. The initial lactate collection date and time is not always the first documented collection. Keep in mind that determining the initial lactate collection date and time can be complicated by multiple lactate collections within the acceptable time frame. We are looking for the highest result value within the acceptable time frame to determine the initial lactate collection. Abstraction guidelines allow for exclusion of the elevated lactate results. Of course, we have to have specific provider documentation to support this. This could affect whether or not a repeat lactate collection is required, or if septic shock was met by severe sepsis and initial lactate result equal to or greater than 4.0. Lastly, determining the correct initial lactate collection date and time will also determine the date and time of the repeat lactate collection. This concludes today's presentation. Thank you for attending today, and please join us next month. Our presentation will be Sepsis Chatter, COVID-19 Exclusion Updates. For further information regarding severe sepsis and septic shock, please refer to the following resources. Thank you and have a nice day.